Jens, super nice to have you here. Thank you for saying yes.
Thanks for having me.
I know you just said that you're super busy. You decided to say yes to us to have this podcast that's yet is not published. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
I think it's a cool topic.
Thank you. Really, I'm really happy. One thing that for us has been it's core to who you are and your work is supporting founders. And you've been sharing a lot of advice and messages addressing founders via LinkedIn. One of the things the things you say the most is don't give up too early. What does that mean to you? And when you think about your life, what was a time where you felt you were about to give up, but you stuck with it?
I mean, everything that is worthwhile, everything that's worth doing is probably not simple to the people doing it. Because, or think about it this way around, if it was simple, it would already have been done by somebody. So all the things that are really worthwhile doing are probably pretty hard. Yeah. So therefore, the analogy might be so let's just say there's a new TV series. Most frequently, season 1 is not the best season. It's typically season 2 or 3. Yeah. So it's either the second or the third season where the thing really, really gets up to its peak performance, and then it sort of goes down. And it's why? Because you learn from doing it how you should really be doing it. And then you really do it, and then it becomes joyful, and then eventually it becomes a little boring. And then that's sort of why it drops off. Yeah. But I think the theme of this podcast is about life transitions, if you like, or finding meaning in life, or how to find meaning in life through transition, or any combination thereof, right? And I mean, I used to be a natural scientist, and then I became a founder, and now I'm an investor. And that's a couple of really big transitions. Yeah, I was a scientist I studied it, then I did a PhD, and then I stopped. And I was no longer a scientist. And then I went into startups, and then I did that for 9 years. And now I've been an investor since 2012, so that's now 14 years. Yeah. And I think you need to get to the point in everything, not in everything that you do, but you want to get to the point where you've either cracked something, or you've certainly brought it to the point where you've been able to make the decision, either I got it done, or I haven't got it done. And the funny thing is, there is this thing that I've found where it's like there is almost no difference between I can't get it done and it can't be done. Because you can't, for you practically, it makes very little difference. And it is there is a point where when you run out of ideas and you run out of energy, you say, I can't get this done, I don't know how. Yeah? I've run out of ideas. That's the point where you need to stop. As long as you continue to have ideas and you know what's wrong, you probably feel compelled to continue doing what you're doing.
You were saying season 2 and 3 are usually the best ones, and then it starts to get boring over time. Was it also the points in your career where you approached season 5, 6, 7 and thought, okay, maybe it's about time I move on to something else? Or was it more intentional and strategically driven? Can you share a bit more?
No, I mean, I was basically, when I was in school, I just learned that I'm quite heavily drawn towards the natural sciences. Why? Because it's just, I never had any resonance with sort of social sciences, broadly speaking. I enjoyed history quite a lot in school, and I did English, okay, but then I did all of the, math, physics, chemistry, biology. I did all of the natural sciences I thought really, really fascinating. So I then went off and studied biology for a number of reasons, but biology in Freiburg was really super broad, right? It was like all the natural sciences, plus math, plus statistics, plus whatever they all did. There was 2 years, was exceptionally broad education. And then I specialized in genetics. And then it was simply finished because thank God you don't stay at university forever.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a decision, it was just a fact of life.
Yeah.
But then I decided that, I went to the UK on a stipend, and I was suddenly finished after 3 years with a bachelor. And I couldn't go back to Germany because at the time in the 90s, a bachelor in Germany did not exist and it had no meaning. You couldn't do anything with it. So So then I thought, okay, I can either go back and I can do a master's that would take me 2 years, or I stay in the UK and I do a PhD and it would take 3 years. And I thought, okay, PhD is better than a master, yeah? So I'll do a PhD. And then I got a stipend to do that, and they paid for everything. And then I had no money, so I applied for all the things that paid for everything. There were 6 of them in the country. So I applied to all 6, and I got invited to 3 interviews, and I got 2 job offers. I picked one of them.
Right. Amazing.
So that's literally how it worked, right? So, and then I did that, and then it finished, yeah? But I decided that at the end of this, that I didn't want to pursue a career as a professor, yeah? So that was a conscious choice. So then you could say that's strategic, but I don't think that was a strategic decision. That was more a function of understanding what I enjoy doing. And because I had built technology that we had, you know, they had 2 parts to my PhD. One was my fundamental research, and the other one was applied technology research. And I enjoyed the applied side far more than I did the research part. The research part. So that was a self-recognition process. Then I became involved, and we set up a student society called Biology and Business. And I became the president of that. And then we had all of these. So basically the job was go and find all of the cool biotech companies out there and invite them in so that the CEOs would come and pitch their business to PhD students to potentially look for people to hire. Yeah. So then I was sitting there in these lectures that I had organized. So there were like 10 of us or whatever. And then suddenly there were these people sitting in the audience. They were wearing the jackets and the suits. And they were clearly not scientists from the lab next door or anything. So there were some guys from London, yeah? So you go to these guys and say, oh, who are you? And it's like, oh, I'm a venture capitalist. I work for Ebbingworth Management or something like that. It's like, oh, really? What's a venture capitalist? Yeah, I fund all these companies that are doing these technologies. It's like, so tell me how that works. Yeah, we have these funds, and then we take money from these funds, and then we invest in these companies. And if they're good, they make us much more money, and then we make a return for our investors in these funds. And I thought, that's the coolest shit ever.
Yeah, I can sit in the audience. I could be that guy.
And I thought, yeah, so I applied to all of them and nobody took me. So
and that was your first touch point with
I didn't even know that this existed, right? So I was at the Institute of Biotechnology, and every group did applied research, and it was always about making companies with technology. And then I met the people who were financing that, and I suddenly realized if I could do a job like that, that would be enormous fun.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes.
So, but then that's when I graduated. This was in 2002, 2003. That was in the middle of a really, really deep recession. And well, it's the winter of venture capital after the technology bubble burst in the spring of 2000, right? And so there were no VC funds. Nobody had any money. The whole industry, the biotech industry in the UK was collapsing. The whole thing was just going nowhere. And so therefore there was nothing for me to do. So instead what I did is I became a biotechnology analyst in an information and research startup, because there I was talking to a lot of investors, but I didn't invest myself, right? So, but I had a job that was sort of came quite close to it. And then I so I worked for a startup, and then I started a company myself. Yes. And then after I started the company, I made so many mistakes that I just got lots of mentors to help me make fewer mistakes. And then I learned a lot about lean startup methodology. I became very involved with the scene. And suddenly in London, I was one of the, I don't know how many people who knew more about that than most other people. And then people approached me and said, should we do a startup studio together?
Which was Forward Labs at that time.
Right. So then I did Forward Labs. That was part of Forward Internet Group. Yeah. So again, that wasn't a strategic decision. This is more interest-led, right? So I think the pattern that I have learned about myself, I just do things that interest me, and then I naturally get drawn into the next thing. It's a very natural transition, if you like, right? So then when I was doing Forward Labs, and also before then, I was mentoring founders because I thought they make too many mistakes. Yeah. And then obviously the accelerators came, and they knew that I was mentoring founders anyway. So they said, hey,
Techstars.
Well, at the time it was called Springboard, but John Bradford called and said, why don't you mentor? I've already picked 10 cool founders and we've given them money. Don't you want to come up to Cambridge and mentor 10 teams?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, sounds great, right? And then
how How long in your career was that?
That was 2011. Mm-hmm. And then, so I went up, I mentored these folks, and then I did that, I invested in one of them, and I tried to help these guys, but it didn't work out in the end. But that was years later. But then during demo day, I was sitting there, and I was sitting next to Bradford for whatever reason. And then Brad Feld, who is like one of the co-founders of Techstars, was standing there. It was a pretty small lecture theater at the time, yeah?
This is London, right?
That was in Cambridge. And then basically he was standing there, he was pitching Techstars and what it was all about. And I thought, this is the coolest shit.
Yeah.
So basically I said to John's like, how can I get your job? And then John made me a job offer to work with, it was called, they had a separate company. I didn't do it. It didn't make sense for me. But I mentored in the programs for years. And then at some point when I stepped out of Forward Labs to move back to Germany, they approached me and said, do you want to run Techstars in Germany?
Berlin, right?
Yeah, in Berlin. Do you want to set this up and run this? I said, yeah, I can do that. Mm-hmm. I know how this works, right? And I did that for 4 years and I was very successful. I mean, in the time when I was the first program I did with Bradford in London. So in that program, we had a company that was later called Sandbird that was at some point valued at easily over $1 billion.
That was part of the accelerator?
Yeah, that John ran. And I was happy to co-run it with him. And then 2015, we did the first Berlin program. And then we had a company there called Preply that's now very, very large. They haven't disclosed how large, but it's pretty significant. You can probably assume it's in that unicorn territory as well. Yeah. And then the last one was Arweave, the infrastructure behind NFTs. We fully exited that into transactions years ago, also at a multi-billion valuation. So it was like the Techstars time in Berlin was like super golden, yeah.
Right. Was the model of Techstars at that time the same as now? So you get sponsors or corporates that actually invest and also direct the topics, or it was very different?
No, I mean, Techstars had initially, there were two types of programs. There were city programs and there were corporate programs, right?
Yeah, okay. Corporate programs.
And they were very different. So Techstars London and Techstars Berlin were city programs at the time. And then corporate programs were something like the SAP Accelerator or the Metro Accelerator or, the Barclays Accelerator and things like that. Equinor, Disney, I mean, dozens of different ones.
Right.
But then again, the natural transition is I do Techstars, one of my LPs is Oliver Klaasen. We work through some issues. I resign, I tell him that I just want to write angel checks, and he calls me and says, hey, why don't we found an investment company together, and we pool capital, and he'll do the administration in his family office, and I'll do the investing and so forth, right? So the reason why I'm laboring this story is a little bit because you want to talk about transitions, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, certainly for me, all the transitions from one thing to the next were very organic and very interest-led. So I did something, and I became interested in something else. And then through the work that I was putting in my spare time, if you like, it transitioned into the next thing. And therefore it's always, when you transition, it's always a question of push and pull. So you get pushed out of from where you are. You don't want to do this. If you were highly interested, if you really wanted to do this thing, doesn't matter it would have to be an extraordinary pull from the other side. Yeah?
Do not do it. You mean? Yeah, so it's something that comes to you and you cannot not do it.
Well, but it's always push and pull. So the new thing pulls you in and the old thing pushes you out, right? And it needs to be both. And typically, so let's just say you're in a job, you're somehow unhappy. Typically, your boss will be not a great person to work for.
It's the truth.
But it's the most frequent reason why people leave, right? The company is dysfunctional, your boss is dysfunctional, or there is an aspect of it, my commute, we talked about this before, my commute is dysfunctional. There's a heavy dysfunctionality about what's going on in one way or the other. Yeah? So that pushes you out. And then you are drawn into the new thing because you have an interest that's quite natural, that has evolved over time. And certainly that's been for me, that's the case. But when I see people transitioning, I always see the push and the pull. Yeah, both, and in almost every transition.
It sounds like your natural interest in something automatically created opportunity for you along the way, even unintentionally.
Yes.
Like sometimes when people talk about luck, they forget to differentiate. There's different kinds of, like, you can be lucky just walking on the street and finding money on the ground, or you can be lucky by putting yourself in a position that pulls luck in your direction. And listening to your story so far, it sounds like you just kept putting yourself in positions that pulled interesting topics or people in your direction that took you to the next stage of your trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let me give you an example that's maybe from my student days. So it's a long time ago, yeah? But that's in the 90s. For all of you born in the 2000s. But basically, so when I was studying, and that was a full-time job, definitely in Freiburg. That was biology. That's super tough course. And so I did 3 things by the side of that. So the first one is I worked to earn money. I restored antique furniture. Yeah. So that was just to make some money. And the second was I was working in a lab for free in the basement in the cool room, several hours every week.
Biology lab.
In the biology department in Freiburg. Yeah. But because of that, I worked in the lab. I knew everything about the lab because I knew what everything was called, I knew how everything worked, I knew what everything was, I knew how to do certain things because I had been doing them for many, many hours. Yeah. And I helped a PhD student or postdoc PhD student complete a research paper. So she published something and I did the grunt work. I don't think I was even mentioned. Certainly didn't get an authorship out of it, yeah? But I did a lot of work for that. Yeah? So whether that was completely legit is a different question, but we'll get to why that is important then. And the third thing that I did is I set up together with a few other students, we set up what we call the B team. And we set up this box where the exams were so difficult, you could not pass, right? It was like the failure rate was 50%. It was exceptionally hard. But what we spotted was there were patterns. So professors would ask certain type of questions and they were repeating over time. Yeah? And we figured out from which books they took these questions. And it was a bit more elaborate, but we basically came up with an exam preparation set of hundreds of cards with questions at the front and answers on the back. There were collections of all questions that had ever been asked and the most likely questions that could be asked based on all the books that they were typically reciting from, right? And we set up this entire system where we prepared ourselves and we all got a B, right? We were like, of the 6 students, like 4 of them were in the top 10 of a 200 people course with 200 people or something like that. It was completely ridiculous, right? Perfect day. And then the year after we sold the box, make many thousands of euros. And then the year after the professors got wind of it and changed the exam and everybody just failed or something like that. Anyway, but the point was, so then when I went to Leeds, where I got the exchange studentship, I sent these people a fax, all the professors, and said, I would like to study properly and get into the last year of the degree program. Is that possible? And I thought if I send them a fax, then these little rolled up pieces of paper would be on the table and then they wouldn't throw them away, right? An email or a letter or whatever, but nobody sends a fax. So if I send a fax, I'm the guy with a fax.
You're going to cut through the noise.
So I sent the fax, I didn't hear anything back. I went there and then I enrolled and I got onboarded by a professor and he said, you are the guy with the fax, right? It's like, I'm the guy with the fax. And he said, do you still want to do this? And I said, yeah, I still want to do this, right? Yeah. And he said, okay, it's great. Yeah, we've been thinking about how this could be done. And I said, okay. So he said, yeah, we've asked the university whether we can do something. Basically, they said, you were able to enter the 3rd year of the degree program because your knowledge is so advanced. Advanced standing entry, that's what it was called. He said it's typically only ever given to people so they jump over the 1st year. But I said, you've already done 2 years and your degree, like your year here is fully paid. The studentship pays all the fees. So we said to the university, can this guy get a degree? And the university said, well, if he increases the average mark sufficiently well, yeah, then yes, because then we'll get more money.
No pressure. Wow.
Yeah? So then basically I had to basically say, so okay, so how does that work? Well, we're going to do an oral exam right now. So I had to go into the room next door. There were two professors who were sitting there, and then they asked me questions. Yeah? And the questions, I knew all the answers because we just prepared with the box. Yeah? And because I'd worked in the lab. Because I worked in the lab for free, in the basement, at 4 degrees or whatever, in the cold room with a winter jacket on, in the summer while everybody was out drinking beer and having party. Right? And they said, what does this mean? What are the red stripes on the, but it's like, how does this work? Why do you do it like that when you're in the lab? How do you do this? What does this mean? What is the law of this in evolutionary biotics? And that was the last question. I said, guys, the law is crap. Everybody knows the law is crap. The exceptions are the only interesting piece, but the law in general, let's forget about the law. I don't want to talk about the law. And then I said, okay, that's enough. And then one of them said, this guy knows more than 95% of all the people who have ever been here. The other guy said, he's absolutely in. But look, this basically, the reason why I'm telling this story is like all these transitions that are really interesting and unusual all happen because you've done something before that has really prepared you for this step, although you didn't even know that the step was actually there. You were just intrinsically prepared to take the step, or any step like it, a similar type of step somewhere else in a slightly different direction, because you don't know what the step is, but you are kind of like pre-prepared for a step like that.
I wonder about this topic a lot, and how much you think is, one can say it's predetermination, you have this destiny that is like everything that happened prepared you to where you are right now, or the other version of it is that you use the learnings from each of the steps. For example, in your case was the lab, was the preparing the box for people to pass the exam.
Yeah.
You use them to where you are right now. You pick the learnings from all the steps you did out of your toolbox, and then you deploy them into what you're doing right now. So independently from whether you believe in destiny or not, it's more like you're collecting learnings, and then you're like, okay, I've done this before, let me use it for this.
I think it's almost the other way around. So let's just say you have a hobby, yeah? And let's say, I'm just gonna make some things up right now that are very different, right? So let's just say one hobby is Taekwondo or something like that, yeah, some martial art, yeah? So then you do martial art and you become very physically fit, mentally kind of like changes your mind. You meet certain type of people there who do these things, yeah? And then maybe you meet certain people who are running certain types of businesses, or who the kind of people who are naturally drawn to that. You become immersed in that culture and that way of thinking, yeah? So then you become more attuned towards opportunities from that part of life, right? Let's just say you have a different hobby and you're heavily into wine, yeah? And you become a connoisseur in fine wine or something like that, right? And then you go to places where these kind of people hang out. Again, you will meet different type of people. There will be different types of entrepreneurs, different types of business owners, different types of whatever. And then you become more attuned towards people who are a part of that kind of culture. So that your hobbies or the things that you do develop yourself in a way where you become naturally, you attune yourself to that way of doing things. Yeah. Or let's just say if you said, well, I want to spend 6 months in San Francisco because I want to be surrounded by those kind of investors, those kind of founders, then you attune yourself towards those kind of people, and then you become more like them, and then you find more opportunities that are like that. You develop yourself in that direction.
Yes.
You often hear that advice that, especially early in your career, you should not optimize for salary, because that's going to follow naturally anyway at some point. And it reminds me of what you were saying about working in the lab for free, which I guess alternatively, you could have also worked as a bartender, make some money, and even have more fun along the way. But instead, you unintentionally or intentionally chose to optimize for, let's call it equity instead of salary, because it gave you so much more trickle-down effects further down the road.
Yeah, but so the reason why I did that was not because I didn't really think about money or not. I had money, I was restoring antique furniture, right? So, I had some money. So, and I did that to make money, but also because I just went to the store and I could see that they had 3 workbenches, but there were only 2 people. And I just asked them, what's the 3rd workbench? Yeah. And so there's nobody working there. And I said, do you need a third person? I said, can you do these kind of things? And I just said yes. And then I said, okay, great. And when do you want to start?
Now?
I said, yeah, something like that. It was literally like that, right? I think, but there I learned about antique furniture, and because I thought it was cool. So I did the things not because I didn't really think that the work in the lab was, I just wanted to do it. I just thought if I do it, then I am better prepared for because I thought I was going to be a scientist, and I became one, right? I just thought it was interesting, and I basically wanted to do it. Yeah. And that this guy was later the guy who handed out the scholarships, I didn't even know. But it's sort of like
yes.
you just learn these. The more you do, the more you develop your relationship with people, your knowledge, and actually yourself in a certain type of direction. And then these transitions become far more natural or logical, or whatever you want to call that, than you. And certainly in my case, some of these things were a bit more pre-planned, but they were, at the same time, they were very natural. Yeah, and I think this not taking money initially. I think what you shouldn't do is do stupid things just to make some money, because that doesn't help you. Then you're wasting your time. What you want to do is you want to do things that really interest you. I mean, if you want to work in hospitality, then you should absolutely work in a bar. Yeah? But then you might want to choose a bar that's actually a really, really interesting bar. Yeah, with a very different concept. The bar is working where you can really learn something. Yeah? If you just work in a bar to make some money, that's okay. And that teaches you something, but it teaches you a certain type of grit, right? And that develops your psyche in a certain way and your personality in a certain way. And I think that's okay. But that's how I would look at that, not as a, it's just a way to make some money. But if you can make money in a better way or in a smarter way, you should definitely do that.
Very cool. I'm wondering how much of your background in natural science has shaped the way you approach work and business today?
Yeah, it's huge. 100%.
Can you share like one or two examples, or like just to make it more tangible? Let's say as compared to how you would think of a situation where you had not have this background.
That's not possible.
There's not against who didn't take.
I can't play the game again,
Mm-hmm.
It's not a game that I can play and rerun. That's what I mean. Life is not a game, but it's basically that's what I mean. I can't play that. It's not a game, therefore I can't play again. So I've been trained in biological sciences. Biological sciences work like this is a super messy thing. All sorts of things are happening, and you do an experiment, and then you try to decipher from what the output is something, So that's how biology works, and lots of humans are a messy biological system, if you like, right? People do all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons. So I think of all the natural sciences, biology probably connects the most closely with sociology, right? Because it's a study of like ecology and things like that. That there is a transition to the conscious animals, because that's just there's an additional element that comes on top, if you like. So therefore, I see a lot of these things as experiments where you just continuously. It's like a great journey where it's like an adventure that you go on in your life, and you just discover how certain things actually work systemically, and why they work like that. So I've become, through my studies, quite attuned to systems thinking. Like why do certain organizations output certain things? It's because of the way in which they're organized and the culture that happens across the organizational structure. So structure plus process plus culture, that is that predetermine the output of organizations, or complex organisms, if you want to call them like that. And then you can ask questions like, why is this thing over here, why does that not perform? And the answer is, it's because of typically not so much the people there, but how they do things. and therefore they can't produce the output. It's just like there's so many smart people. They do have the money, they do have the resources, but they can't get it done. And people can't understand how that's. But it's because of how everything is sort of arranged, right? And for somebody who has got scientific training, you just observe the output, and the only thought that you have is like, wow, if I change those 3 things, I wonder what the output would be then, right? And you can then tell from, if you study business, you can see how certain business leaders organize their companies, how they set them up, how they run them, and then they get amazing results. And you see this over and over and over again, and then you see other organizations that are highly dysfunctional over and over and over again, and you see the patterns. And therefore you know, if I want something to be functional, it needs to be more like this, and if I want it to be dysfunctional, it needs to be more like that.
Can you think of one practical example just to make it more tangible? Like, is it bureaucracy? Is it too much overheads? Is it too many decision makers in the system?
Let's just say you have a large bureaucracy. Let's just say it's a department, for argument's sake. Let's just say it has 1,000 people or so, which would be kind of normal. And so there are 1,000 people. They're all intelligent. They're all trained. They're all there. They have money. They have huge buildings. It's like everything is kind of there. Yeah. And then let's just say there are 2 departments. Yeah. Let's just call let's say one has to do with transport, the other one has to do with housing. If you want to build a new place where 10,000 plus people live, they need to have a way to get to there and back. Yeah. So therefore you need to plan transport and housing at the same time. And what you need to do is you need to put down infrastructure first, and then you build the housing, because if you do it the other way around, there's no space for the infrastructure, right? These 2 departments don't talk to each other.
That's a failure in the structure.
That is a failure in how they work, the leadership, the way in which goals are set, the way in which people are made responsible for reaching certain types of goals. If you've been involved with transformation in large organizations and large companies, right, you can tell from, so what happens is you have these bureaucracies, and there's a person at the top, and then all these different departments and sub-departments, and then there is a person in a sub-department who's responsible for X. But in order to get something done that's of significance, that person needs to collaborate with 7 people across different departments in entire different ministries, right? And then all of these ministers need to all work together, and then there needs to be somebody at the top, probably like the mayor here, that says, okay, this is a top priority and I need it to be done in 6 months. And it needs to flow from, you probably need a task force, it needs to be pulled together. All these people need to stop working where they are. Everybody needs to go into one building. They need to sit there for 3 months. They need to work with external experts. They probably need to make that happen or something like that. Yeah, that is how you do effective, goal-oriented, cross-functional, cross-departmental. This is how startups work. Startups are basically cross-departmental by definition at the start. All these different people all work together from the same office on the same goal, right? And then when you have large organizations, if you take all these different functions, you put them in different buildings, you put them in different organizations with different people, and everybody works in silos, nothing happens. And then we ask ourselves, how is that possible that all these people can't get anything done? And the answer is organizational design. It's completely wrong, because it's been designed from a managerial perspective, not from a task-oriented perspective, and therefore things don't get done. Yeah, that's an example. So, and in startups, the beauty of startups is you don't have this problem, because you start already with a task-oriented, cross-departmental body that's laser-focused on getting one single thing done. And that's the beauty of that.
In the startup world, when you look at companies, what is an example of how things are done that can be improved? For example, you get a pitch, you're like, okay, I think if I change these 3 things, like you mentioned before, in these companies, this would have a much better outcome. What would be these 3 things when the organization is, let's say, flat, and then it's more task-oriented, it's better than public administration, for example?
The reasons why startups fail is always the same, right? The people fight, They can't figure out what customers want and they can't give it to them.
Yeah.
If those three things are true, the thing will probably get to a certain level. Doesn't mean it's the number one or the biggest or the best. And it doesn't mean that this market is really going to explode. So those are questions of overall market and overall competition, and then the overall macro. Oh, suddenly you do everything right, and Corona hits, and you're still dead, right? So, which has happened to some of my portfolio companies that were hundreds of people large. So it literally happens. But those three initial things. So you basically don't want to found with people whom you don't know. It's a really bad idea. That is you really want to prevent you from fighting with other people. It's not a good starting point. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to figure out what customers want. And if you're not a technology startup but an execution-focused startup, that's the most important thing. Because there are so many ways in which you can get that wrong. Yeah. And then the third thing is getting it right and giving it to the customers. There are quite a lot of preventable mistakes in all of that. So this can be premature scaling. You spend far too much money on the wrong things at the wrong time and things like that. Yeah. There can also be situations where you're not aggressive enough, so you don't lean hard enough into what needs to be done, and somebody else does it, and you know that they are there, and then they overtake you. Or it could be that you're just so inefficient with your money that the whole organization just implodes under the sheer weight of the overspend, and there's no stopping that. Yeah. Or that you are, so let's just say, sometimes you're in temporary distortions. So you have like the whole delivery service field is a great example of that, where during Corona, all the math worked out because everybody was sitting at home and
just buying from
because it was all the delivery, right? So therefore the math when you look at the grid in the spreadsheet, everything is green, right? And then suddenly people go to the supermarket again, and then all the math shifts, and suddenly most of it is red. There's a tiny little bucket that's still green. Yeah. You suddenly think, oh my God, we've completely built this company for a grid that wasn't real. Yeah. And now we've built this organization, and the culture and the processes and the structures and everything is built for a reality that actually doesn't exist. Yeah. So then you need to rebuild. Either you rebuild the entire company from scratch, in a sense, again, to satisfy what is actually achievable, or the whole thing will just collapse. Yeah. And both have happened so scooter companies are an example of this kind of thing, or some just completely imploded, others went somewhere, right? Or the taxi companies are another examples of that, or the next day delivery companies are an example of that. There's lots in the consumer space, quite a few examples.
E-commerce as well, plenty of e-commerce companies that suffer from that.
Yes. So that's one example. But the most important thing really is try to not co-found with people who will end up fighting. It's a complete disaster.
So on the topic of co-founders fighting, are you suggesting that the longer you know your co-founders, the less likely it is to get in a fight and eventually break up?
Yes. If you've been working with your co-founders for over a year, and that's okay, you're probably not going to fight.
So let's say I want to found a company.
Yeah.
I don't have any co-founders.
Yes.
But I have a brilliant idea, product market fit is there, founder product fit is there. I just don't have any co-founders.
Yeah.
What would you suggest I do?
There are two ways in which this can be done. So you can just do it by yourself, and you recruit a team around you. Yeah, and that can work quite well. So the most famous example of that is Reid Hoffman, when he founded LinkedIn, solo founder, and he hired 5 co-founders, and he gave them all 5% ownership, and then he put in, I don't know how much money he put in by himself, but he had 75%, and they all had 5% ownership. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you should hire 5 people and give them all 5% ownership. I'm just saying that's an example of how you can get something off the ground as a solo founder. Yeah, so that's one way to do that. There are other ways in which this can be done. So for example, I invested in the startup with a solo founder, and he has a co-founder who I think got 20% or something like that. And he didn't know him, he hired him. And I said, look, I passed on this company, and he called me, and I remember where I was standing, and he talked me into it, right? And I was like, no, look, yes, we're basically not co-founders. I'm the solo founder. Yeah, and it's all on me. If my co-founder doesn't work out, then I have to tidy this up, but the company will be okay because I need to make that happen. Yeah.
So you were saying at that point, so if you go down the route of solo founding and then hiring your co-founders, then you say there is still leverage because you still retain more than, let's say, you have the majority of shares.
Yes.
And you're still the one who will take the responsibility and make things work by
doing
replacing.
that. Yes. So then you have a founder,
right,
and you have co-founders or a co-founder. And so for example, at Angel Invest, I'm the founder and Oliver is the co-founder. Mm-hmm. And
Understood.
Oliver actually insisted on that distinction in our names, or in our not in our titles. He said, no, I want it to be clear. You're the founder, I'm the co-founder.
Got it.
You are full-time, I do a day a week. Yeah. And that's sort of, and then obviously the equity distribution was also very different. So it's not 50-50. When you're co-founding with 3 people, I think the fundamental advice needs to be that if 2 people together decide that the third person needs to leave, then that needs to be possible. Mm-hmm. Because if you have a situation where 2 people want the third person to leave, but they can't make that happen, that's an absolute disaster.
Clear.
Yeah.
And on the topics of getting into fights, like what are the typical ones from your experience?
There are so many different versions of that. So if founders are of completely different age groups, for example, they would have completely different expectation of what they want to accomplish, how much they want to work, how they're going to work. The culture is very different. If you live in different cities, if you don't work from the same office, that's immediately kind of a problem. Because then it's very hard to rub on each other, right? And really build out the culture correctly. So you need to figure out how to overcome that, which is difficult. There's a question of power. Who actually has the power in this organization? Who determines the vision and where everything goes? Oh, if there is a distinction in the vision, or who is actually in charge, who is really leading. So this is why when you typically have a CEO and a COO and a CTO as a starting team, there's very high potential for friction between the CEO and the CTO and the COO, because they can, depending on the company type, there can be a lot of conflict because they're both operational in a sense, right? Yeah, you fight over direction, you fight over power. There's a lot of power struggle, basically. And there's quite a lot of versions of that. There is one that's around direction, around power, around how hard somebody works. There's a question of capabilities, meaning one person can't actually do the job after all. It just becomes apparent after a year or so. They just can't execute correctly or enough or fast enough or anything like that. You can have naughty behavior of various different types. I think with their Techstars, where they invested in 5,000 companies, there's almost nothing that I haven't seen, and I really don't want to talk about it because it's so much. You have no idea.
Oh my God. I can also imagine, but that's a question for you, that during difficult times, like let's say a pandemic hits, and you're really struggling to survive, that opens the floodgates for conflict as compared to everything's going well, we're hitting all the targets, people are interested in our product, there's less room for friction. Is that, would you agree with that?
Yes, no. I think what I've found is that founders typically fight in months 6 to 9, irrespective of what happens. It's always months 6 to 9. And then by month 12, they've either grown together as a team or they've fallen apart.
So 6 to 9 from the inception of the company or from the first fundraising?
No, when they start the company. Mm-hmm. It's almost like a law from God. You fight in month 6 to 9. This is why it's typically a good idea to ask founders when they haven't been together for long. Let's say typically month 9, or 12. You can ask, what's been your biggest fight to date? And then they look at each other, and then you can tell whether they've been right? And then they will bullshit you. And then you'll say, no, I really want to know what it was.
So for you being an investor and kind of knowing that there is a probability that the next coming months, which are going to be in month 6 to 9, are likely going to lead to fights.
Yes.
How do you prepare them or mentor them, or how do you try to mitigate the situation?
These days I just walk away. I don't invest.
Yeah.
I would not invest in a company where I can see that happening.
So one example that you gave is obviously they don't know each other very well yet. Another one could be one wants to be the CEO, the other one wants to be the COO. That's already...
It's typically this configuration is only there initially because either they work this out. I mean, I think all teams fight in months 6 to 9. Yeah. And the problem is when that happens while you're doing a startup, then that can destroy the startup. And so what you want to do is, as a founder, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you can actually fight with your co-founders. It's by far the highest, I would say so I'll give you an example. In the first Techstars program that I ran in Berlin in 2015, there were 10 companies in there. And of the 10 companies, every single one where the co-founder were recently together, every single one of them failed. And of the other 4 companies where that wasn't the case, all 4 of them made it. Yeah. And one had a tiny little exit and I didn't make any money. One was sold for, we made about 10 times money, and the founders are now kind of wealthy. One has raised a lot of money and is doing, okay, let's just say, and one is preppy.
Yeah.
So that's basically it, right? So I should have just, if I had invested into the other 6 slots that I had into teams that were actually, it couldn't have been worse than the other 6 companies because they were all fighting, every single one of them. And it's sort of like, it's not that I don't like the founders or anything like that, but the teams didn't work at all. Yeah. I like some of those guys, I'm friends with some of those guys, and they brought me good deals since then, right? But nobody should have backed those companies.
It sounds like the founders themselves could be successful or maybe are successful, but together as a team, it's a recipe for disaster at some point.
I don't think it's like, I honestly think all teams fight. Mm-hmm. It's just you either work through that.
How you handle the fight is more important than...
Yeah, no, it's not even that. It's just, it's a fact of life. Mm-hmm. All teams have conflict. And you either work through that or you don't. I'm just saying is ideally you have this conflict outside of doing a startup together. Because that's super painful. So for example, let's just say you're friends and you've been doing things together for years, right? And that guy, he's kind of difficult, he's a bit of a bully or something like that. I don't want to work with that guy, right? So then you create a circle of friends for certain type of people with whom you get on, yeah? And then maybe you do a business together. That has got a much higher chance of succeeding because as a team, you've already gone through difficulties, yeah? And for example, if you, or you've worked together somewhere else, yeah? We've worked together at this other company before, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Or you've done the startup and you've had, this is quite a frequent occurrence, like 3 co-founders, one is gone, big disaster, the cap table is kind of in disarray, the IP is not locked down or any of those situations. And then somebody comes in and says, okay, but you've got a product, you've got some traction. And then somebody comes in and says, okay, I'll help you tidy this up. And then you make the company whole and you've got a really good team. Yeah. So I've done that on a number of occasions. I think that's okay. Yeah. So, but I think every single team needs to fight to become a good team.
Yes. So interesting. And I'm really curious to know if you want to share your personal relationship with the founders. And I'm thinking about this from different perspectives. Like, let's say I'm a founder and I want to do fundraising and I'm looking for like who would be the best investor to fit my situation. Mm-hmm. You can think about it as all I really need is the money, or I'm looking beyond money into mentorship, all different sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know, like, how does it work with your founder relationship? Do you, for example, get calls where they are, I don't know, stressed out, at the brink of a meltdown, something is going wrong, maybe not even in their company, but even in their personal life? I have no idea. And how do you deal with these situations, if yes?
You pick up the phone at 11 at night and you talk to them.
So that's part of your job?
That's part of my job, and that really happens.
At what point is there a boundary that you're like, okay, this is too much, I can't help you with this?
The boundary is, so let's first talk about the positives. Let's first answer the first question, which was, how do you think about your investors? There are probably, as a broad categorization, the vast majority of investors whom you're going to meet are going to be benign. Whether they sit on your board or not, they will sit there. Like, out of 10 people, 8 are probably like, whether it's Hans or Jürgen or Caroline or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's all the same, It's like the impact that they have or not. It's very, very small, if any, because they do nothing, and they do neither good nor harm. Really, they're just there, basically, broadly speaking.
Is that also to be expected?
Well, I've come to expect that. Yeah. Then you have a small number of people, when they come, they do magic. Yeah. They're just like an essential force for good. They just do things for the companies. They sort shit out. So when you go into a boardroom and you happen to be in a board meeting, you can tell after one board meeting who falls in which category. It's like very quick. And then you've got a small number of people who are really toxic. Yeah. So the number one thing for a founder is try to not find any of these toxic people. They are really destructive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you really, really, really want to avoid those people. That is the most important thing. And then if you can find some that are good, that's great. Yeah, because they can really make a lot of difference. So that is sort of, but there are not many of them, but there are some of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that is, and then over time you should collect them. This is not just true for investors. This is actually true for anybody in your life. There are some toxic people. Yeah. There are lots of people who are just, it's nice to hang out with them. And then there are some people who are kind of special, right? So you want to collect the special ones as much as you can. The same is true for investors. Now, the question is then, how do I deal with, well, what is the line for me with founders? The line is when I get lied to, or when founders behave in ways that are way beyond acceptable, which would be things like stealing money, sexual harassment, physical violence, like
extreme cases.
Well,
it happens.
It happens.
Wow.
So you really have, or right. So that's basically where I just or when they just lie to me, or when they start defrauding other people or investors or anything like that. So anything that's effectively illegal or goes in that direction, I just draw the line very hard, absolutely categorical, super quickly.
When you say lied to, can that also be, quote unquote, just toxic optimism? You think everything's going well, you are so 100% certain that you will fix all the problems that you don't even realize that you've gotten delusional and you're telling people stuff that is like obviously not true.
Yeah, then you just feel sad. Yeah, and you can't help these people. That's a different problem though. Mm-hmm. But then that falls more in the camp of incompetence. Yeah, that is an aspect of incompetence, or a version of that, if you like. So there, what happens with incompetence, that's different. Look, at the end of the day, everybody who is involved with any business, you will not be part of that business forever. Whether it's through your death eventually, or if through any other thing that happens before you eventually die, eventually you will leave this company. Yeah. So I'm 50 now. In 50 years, I'll be part of no company, or approximately. So I'll definitely leave everything. So therefore, the question is not whether you leave. The question is just when you leave and how you leave, right? And then when you think about startups, you over time, you just what happens is that with almost anybody, certainly with certain types of people, certainly the core founders, the CEOs, they can, you see them grow, and then others can also grow with those companies. But very, very frequently what you see is that at some point, either the CEOs or anybody of the team members steps out. Typically because the company has grown to a point where they just can't do the. There's some things that are incredibly difficult to learn so quickly. You can't keep up. Or your life has changed and, I don't know, you've fallen sick, somebody else has fallen sick, you have other problems, whatever it is, right? Somebody in your family, you need to look after them or something like that. Or there's been an accident. We have all of these. I mean, we've had founders who've fallen sick, death, accidents, everything, yeah, in their lives. Wives have run away, kids have got real problems, or kids are sick. I mean, there are so many things that can happen. So what then just happens is that these people, for whatever reason, they lose interest, they lose faith, they lose ability. So then you separate from them, yeah, and then you put somebody in. That happens all the time. I think that's supernatural. And the incompetence thing is basically just the job has outgrown them, or maybe they're trying to build a company that actually doesn't exist. It can't exist, right?
Super interesting.
Yeah. So then you shouldn't be doing this anymore. Yeah. And then the investor's job it's the most important job that people on the board have, is to recognize that in CEOs, to put in a new CEO.
Yeah.
It's a primary finance. That's the primary role that you have as a board member, is saying, that person, no.
Yeah.
We need to do something, guys. That's the number one thing.
Yeah. Briefly coming back to the topic of fundraising, let's say I'm a first-time founder. I have no experience. I'm trying to avoid as best as I can the mistakes.
Yeah.
One mistake would be, we just talked about this, however you can try to avoid getting toxic investors on your cap table.
Yeah.
What are other typical mistakes you observe people doing, and what advice would you give them in order to do their best to avoid this or avoid them?
You network and you do due diligence, right? So you just find other founders and you talk to, let's just say if you talk to 20 founders and you network and people who have built something that you kind of respect, yeah? And then you say, I'm thinking about that person. And they'll say, there are very few women in that firm. Do you know why? Say, yeah, he touches all of them. Okay. And that's a true example, right? So, and you basically, I'm on the investor side. So basically, it can also happen in news organizations, or it can happen in startups, or it can happen anywhere, right? But you can basically do DD, and you do reference checks on people, and you basically say, who are the good people whom I should become involved with? Yeah. And people will say, yeah, this is a piece, and then people will tell you, this person is difficult, this person is benign, this person is special. And if you ask them, how would you score them in those three camps? Would you say they're more like that, or more like that, or more like that? And people will very quickly be able to tell you, that guy is special, yeah. I certainly say, I heard, and I haven't got any experience with her, but I know she has backed him, and he says she is epic. Yeah, you say, okay, interesting. And then you can ask a few other people who know her, and if they say the same thing, then she probably is epic. Yeah. So then it's like, can you connect me with her? I would like to. I want to talk to her about my company because I heard. And then is what better way to suck up? So basically say, I've talked with blah blah blah. They all say you're epic, and that's why I would really like to talk to you. Okay.
Yes.
It's a good way to start a conversation, no?
And in that context, how important is it as a founder to be able to ask for help? Because let's say you don't have that network. Let's say you don't know who to reach out to. You don't know 20 other founders. Like, how important is it for you to be able to just go and ask, even if it's strangers, dealing with rejection, but work your way through it just to get that information that you just said is so important.
Yeah, the worst founders are the ones who can't find their customers, right? It's a similar thing. Because if you are unwilling to go and ask somebody, hey, do you want to give me money? That's basically finding customers, right? It's a bit more, it's different than that, but it's at the essence of it, you go to people and say, I've got something for you. I think it's great. Please give me money so I can give it to you. And the discussion with an investor is, I'm building a company. I think it's great. I want your money for a piece of the company. Yeah. So it's a very similar type of discussion. So, if you're unwilling to do that, then you need to find a co-founder.
Yeah, who can do it.
You have a different problem. Then you're not the CEO of the company whose role it is. Then hopefully you're a great programmer or a great robotics guy or something. You have other skills, technical skills. They're much more, not so much people oriented, but much more thing oriented. Yeah.
So just to turn it around. So if I'm a person who is really struggling with going out, having those discussions, asking people for help, for advice, and so on and so forth, it's probably a sign that maybe it's not the right time for me or not the right position for me to become a founder.
I don't know. I don't like these kind of generalizations, right? So for example, I like services companies. I mean, not as an investor, but as for me personally, I thrive in a services environment. I'm not good at working in a product company. For whatever, there is no real, I don't know why, it's just a thing. Yeah. And so therefore, I work in financial services, because although I'm selling a product to investors, it's a productized service. Venture capital is a financial service. So there is a part I think the biggest part of that is self-recognition. So you need to learn about who am I, what do I like, what am I actually good at, what do I want? And then these questions become non-questions because they don't pose themselves anymore because you've already answered them, because you've worked through this in a very different way. So for example, the answer to that would be, well, maybe, let's say you're a brilliant programmer. Why haven't you built like a whole bunch of products where you basically make already $30K a month or something like that? You don't need anybody for that. It's permissionless. You just need to go and do it. Yeah. Or you could say maybe you shouldn't build product. Maybe you're a brilliant trader and you've figured out a nice little algorithm that at a small scale really works, and you can just become super rich by trading off. I don't know, you basically have figured out a carousel of shitcoins that you're rotating around and it just makes money, So whatever, yeah. Right? And if you, short of that, if that's not you and you don't have the compulsion to go off and do these kind of things, then the best advice is try to find special people who are not crooks and spend time with them, and eventually work with one of them or several of them in a row.
And I wanted to ask about motivation. How important is motivation for a founder to start a company, and what is not good enough motivation for them to start?
I don't know. I think all of those things are retrofitted. Yeah. Oh, this guy had a brilliant founder fit, and then in hindsight, so you can look. Sort of all of these stories around the startups that were built and the people who built them and how they were built. These are all these founder stories are invented after the fact.
It's a story.
It's a story that you invent a few years later when you sit in a podcast studio and you need to tell the narrative of how it all fit together. Although at the time you had no clue that was actually how it worked. Yeah. So, but you can tell a nice story, right? So it's always a story arc that's like after the fact. It's sort of it's kind of like half. There's always truth in it. There's like half truth, and the other half is sort of like fleshed out. Yeah. Yeah. So, for example, when I was 12, I broke my back, and I was in the hospital for like a long time, and it was questionable whether my back would heal and I could walk again. This is a true story, right? And before this, I always wanted to become an astronaut. Like, I don't know, many boys, right? But then when I broke my back, I suddenly realized they don't send you up on rocket ships when you've got a broken back. It's like you're categorically disqualified. I can't even go in one of those fly tunnels where you fly on the air. It's like, do you have a back problem? Yeah, I broke my back. Okay, well, you have to sit outside. So that's how that is, right? So then, as opposed to, I've read thousands of science fiction books, right? So, but I can't do the space thing. So then out of science fiction became science. So I became much more interested in science because I suddenly realized science is as close as I can get to science fiction. Yeah. Now, the extent to which all of that is true or not is debatable, but it's kind of like enough substance there that you can weave some kind of story arc out of that, you know?
Yeah.
And and you will find that most of these founder stories, like there's always a whiff of bullshit with all of that, because, right?
This reminds me of these LinkedIn posts going like, I recently broke my back. This is what it taught me about B2B sales.
Yeah, it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
So that's obviously an extreme bullshit example, but there's always, people try to find these connection points, and there is a and you know, there is truth in that, because it certainly changed. I mean, one thing that I definitely did when I broke my back is I tried to think far more from the future to today than I did before, because I always try to think, if I do this, what's the bad thing that can happen to me? And that's become natural. And so that's actually a good thing when you are an investor. You try to think back from the successful point or the point in the future to today. You always think backwards. If I do this, and I'm at this point in a few minutes, months, years, tens of years, what does that mean for today? Yeah. So this is something that but then I didn't even know when I was 13 that was a thing. I just discovered later that I think differently from many, many, many other people. Not all people, but many people. And when you ask the reason why, one of the ways in which I can try to justify that or rationalize it is through that experience, and I can trace it back to that. But whether that's actually true or whether that's part of a story that I tell myself, that's unknowable in a sense. Yeah.
And in a way, like as you said before, like there's no other Jens that didn't break his back.
Yeah, so I can't tell the difference. That's right. So then maybe it's a complete non-issue. That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
So therefore, I don't quite think that is how that works. There is a part of rationalization where you find your own rhythm of doing certain things, and then things happen as a result of that. Yeah.
And from the perspective of you as an angel investor or as a VC, assessing, evaluating a company, a pitch comes to you, it seems interesting. When you look at a founder that the company hasn't found the product market fit, what are the personal metrics, variables, factors that for you matter in investing in that founder?
I don't know. Look, the bottom line goes a little bit like this. I've backed several unicorns in my life. I've also not backed companies that have become unicorns, right? And obviously I should have backed those companies, but then I didn't. And it's sort of 50-50. Yeah, it's like half of the unicorns, half of the non-unicorns. What they told us at Techstars was that they did statistical analysis a few years in. 1,000 startups, a few dozen managing directors, don't know exact numbers anymore, but and then they basically said, so how does that work? Yeah? And here's the bottom line. The good investors, they hit about half of all the really good companies that they see. And the bad investors hit none. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's approximately like that, and you can't hit all of them. That is almost impossible. Yeah, or that's just statistical aberration. It's probably just luck. It's just coincidence, or maybe there's some special people. But certainly, they said if you are presented with 10 strong companies, you will end up picking 5. Yeah, and if you pick 1 or 0, then you're a bad investor. If you pick 5 out of 10, then you're a good investor, because you can never pick 10. Mm-hmm. And there can be many reasons why you don't pick a company. Many, many reasons. You've got a bad interaction with one of the founders. The company is actually doing something that doesn't make any sense, so you don't invest, and then they pivot 6 months later and it becomes brilliant. Yeah. Or there is a thing where you say, I really don't want to invest in the 14th company that does X. Mm-hmm. And then you meet the 14th company that does X, and it is worth $2 billion after some time. Yeah. So then basically these are all 3 true stories, right? Mm-hmm. So then you just sit there and you think, yeah, shit. And maybe I should have backed the 14th company to do X.
Yes.
But I've already in my mind decided I don't want to do that, so therefore I didn't. Yeah, and that is that's kind of how this works. So then what do you look for? You always look for the same things. You look for high intelligence, you look for high energy, you look for the ability to listen, you look for ability to sell and to basically take people with you. You look for, do they have the nose for money? Can they figure it out? Those would be kind of CEO attributes, right? Then you can look for co-founder attributes on the technology side and so forth, or some other side. So you can look at the market, you can try to figure out that, you can try to look at the model that they have. You can look at all of those things, and you do all of that, and you think everything is great, and then they do it exactly like you thought, and then nothing happens because everybody was wrong.
We can predict the future in the end.
Well, if we could, then there would be no. If the future was much more predictable, there would be no venture capital asset class because it would have been arbitrated away. That's basically that's how that works.
Yes, you mentioned something before, which big part of your work is also supporting founders. So let's say you pick a company that, in your view, has reasonable chances of being successful or becoming a unicorn, hopefully. And to what degree do you think that your contribution as being in your 3 different buckets of a good investor, you are the special one, and you can bring something valuable to the company, to what degree do you think that would be a differentiating factor? If that makes sense. So do you think that it's a good company, I can make it great, or it has to be already a great company and I can just help them when they face a challenge where I can help them solve that?
Yeah, I think people who think that they can add magic to companies are delusional.
Or consultants.
It's complete. I cannot think of a single. It's very. So what the good investors do is that they remove obstacles so that the great companies can really shine. Yeah, and they help them on the strategy side to flesh out how to do it better, but the magic needs to be intrinsic with the founders and with the market, right? But they can help. You can help on the strategy side. You can help on the product and go to market. You can help with the team building effort and team problems and so forth. You can help with fundraising. I mean, if anything, if VCs are not good at fundraising, that's a real problem because you have to be. And so you really, that's one area where, because I've seen hundreds of companies fundraise and I've been I've done fundraising so many more times than the founders have. I am definitely so much better than most of them at doing that. That is the one area where an early stage, high frequency investor should be absolutely excellent in schlepping along some really great follow-on investors into this company. And if you can't do that, then you really have no reason for existence, right? More or less. So it's basically, but those are the 4 dimensions: strategy, product and sales, team, fundraising. Those are the 4 CEO problems. And you can add value in all 4 areas, right? But you can't add value where none exists. It doesn't work. What you're doing is you're removing. It's like there's a whole bunch of things that stop the company from being great, and the more of those things you can take away, the better the company will grow and perform. I think that's the way. But to think like, oh, there are some brilliant founders, but I've got the magic, and I'm this additional magic, and I'm going to throw it in, and then it's going to be truly great, right? Oh God, I'm not sure I've ever seen that happen. I'm really, really struggling. That only happens when they meet somebody, and this person says, "I love this. I'm going to join the team."
So it becomes an operator in the company.
Yes, that sometimes happens.
With a specific skill, usually.
Yes.
Sales or.
Yeah, or even they become the CEO or something like that, right? So they can really, that can really happen. But then they change the company, they change the team by really being, by adding a lot to the team, and in a very substantial way. And that typically, as a VC who shows up for a board meeting once a quarter, that it's like the idea that you can touch somebody. Now, this is why I hate the Midas list so much. Yeah, the name is just, I hate the name.
Misleading.
I have the Midas touch. What I touch, because Midas is a king, and what he touches turns to gold. Yeah, and if you think you're the guy and that you touch it and it turns to gold, I swear, I know quite a few people who are on this Midas list, right? And none of them think that they're the guy who goes in and touches the company that turns to gold. It's like, if you go to Pavel and say, Pavel, do you think you're the guy like that? He was just like, you must be sick. Yeah. Something has gone wrong with your mind. You know?
Love it. The causality is non-existent, and as you were saying, it's like retrofitting a story. You're looking at someone who has been involved with great companies, and then you're like, oh, it's because of them. They are the common denominator that made the companies great.
Yeah, but this is because the founders, look, in venture, the founders choose the investors. You know, the investors don't choose the founders. This is different from public stock market. In the stock market, you pick. You're just a picker. You have no additional anything. You just pick. In venture, you need to have a value proposition or a positioning in the market or the respect in the market, where the founders come and they choose you. And then when you have that, then you have the selection between great founders who come and approach you and say, hey, we've heard so many great things about you and we see that you're involved with a lot of great companies, so we want to work with you and not with some, or obviously I'll say that to 10 people, but in those 10 cases, it will probably be true. So I think this is how venture works. You need to move yourself in a position where you get approached by the right kind of founders.
From your experience being so involved here in Berlin for so many years, do you observe any shifts in the VC landscape here?
Yeah, when I came, there was no VC landscape. So yeah, it shifted quite a lot.
So is it okay, let me specify.
No, I mean, like, literally, it's a bit quizzical, right? But it's literally when I first came here. I mean, I moved in 2014 and I was already here. So I moved here in August and I started to travel here much more frequently in sort of January, February 14. And at the time, I have got the list somewhere of all of the investors who were here at the time. Yeah, and there were, I think, 12 startup studios. There were maybe 5 VCs. And there were maybe 20 angel investors.
Super small.
There's nothing. It's like the only thing that Berlin had going for it was Matt Kohler from Benchmark had said, Berlin is fucking cool, it's gonna be huge. And then obviously had Rocket Internet, right? So that was basically it. And then there were all these other guys who were like super small in that day. So there was like, it was cool. Yeah. There was lots of space, everything was cheap. And then the real estate boom, if you like, or the rise of real estate prices started in 2015. So that was 1 year later. Yeah. So from 2015 onwards, you can see an upward swing in wealth creation, in costs. Obviously, both go hand in hand in Berlin. But in 14 or before then, it's completely different. When I launched Techstars in Berlin, before then, we were the first ones who publicly said something like, we are pro-founder, founders first. We had this mantra, even the login to the internet. It's basically the internet was called give first. And that's the most important value at Techstars is give first. It's like if you as a managing director don't have an attitude of give first, you don't get hired. And they screen for that, or at least they used to. And now the cone is back, they probably do that again. But so give first was like the number one thing in that company. Yeah? And so then it's like, how are you different from all the other accelerators? Oh, we have an attitude of give first. We put founders first. And it's like suddenly, like within 2 years, most of the competitors didn't even exist anymore because They had a completely different attitude and value proposition towards founders. And that made them irrelevant. It outcompeted them immediately. Yeah. So, and then as a result, I didn't lose a single deal in 4 years. Like all the offers that we made, we won every single offer. Apart from, there were a few who raised a 2 or 3 million seed round where were basically too late. The timing wasn't right. So, but we never lost against any other immediate competitor, not once in all that time.
Yeah. So. I realize I never thought about competition from a VC standpoint. Just out of curiosity, how does the dynamic work? Or just at least if you want to give an indication, like obviously to a certain degree it helps for more VCs to be in a city or just to support the ecosystem.
Yeah.
But at some point, or is there a point where it turns into like just being oversaturated and too competitive?
Yes, no, because VC is a service business, so you serve the founders. More, that's the number one customer. Number two, obviously, your LPs, who give you money, the limited partners. And the more the ecosystem grows, the more venture capital it can absorb. Because the more founders there are, the bigger the companies are, the more capital can be invested into those companies.
Sure.
At the same time, the investment business, and this is the function of Corona, in the olden days, people said, there are two vectors that we can, or there is a, think of it as a cube that's got 3 dimensions. You've got stage, you've got geography, and you've got speciality. That's the cube. All the investors position themselves in the cube somewhere. Yeah. And so then you say, if we go back to Techstars would say, I'm positioned super early stage, accelerator program in wherever the city is that I am. And then depending on if I do have a program specialization or not, I'm either positioned as a generalist or as a specialist in any individual niche. Yeah. And then the specialists are much more, not so much local, they're much more like international. Yeah. Or I run the Disney accelerator. Yeah. So I'm looking for anything that Disney could do some cool shit with, which is a lot of that was toy related and things like that. Yeah. So, and it actually, one of the companies produced the best selling toy in 1 year in the world. So it was, that was the company called Robotics. But anyway, so then that becomes an international draw. So then, but you're always in the cube. So depending on where you position yourself and depending on whether you are local or not, and the local thing has been largely destroyed by Corona. It's become much more beyond a city. It's like if you either play local or you play Champions League or whatever you play, but basically you're on the phone all the time. So that's basically, or on a video call. So that's how that works. And so yes, there is in the competition. The more that happens, the more competition you have from players who are not local. And then the more their reputation, their size, their specialization, the more important that becomes. So therefore, you could say that you're either people have been talking a lot about that the extremes are on the forefront right now. So you're either writing super small checks super early on, you go super early, you're highly specialized, or you're a monster 15 billion fund, Andreessen Horowitz, whatever. And you come from that end and you're pressing down on the system, like 25% of all the capital raised isn't with one firm, or, in 1 year, it goes in that direction, right? Or 20% or whatever it is. So, and then everybody who's in the middle gets squeezed from both ends. So that's the situation that lots of people have described in the last 12 to 18 months or something like that. So we obviously so I think it's all comes down to positioning. Where do I position myself? What value proposition do I have for founders? Which founders should come and find me? What kind of deals are we helpful for? What kind of companies? For what kind of founders? And so on and so forth. Yeah.
And how much of the competition is also somewhat partnership too? Like I think you mentioned earlier that
it's competition. It's not pure competition. You cooperate. with lots of other people in the ecosystem all the time. But you also compete. It's both. It's called co-opetition.
Co-opetition.
It's co-opetition. You both collaborate and you compete. And there is a discipline in scientific literature. It's called co-opetition. But that's basically venture capital, because if you let's just say nobody just does one thing. Let's just say, if we stick with the Andreessen Horowitz example, they write seed checks, right? But they also write Series A checks or B or C. So they could come in at any round and buy ownership in a company because they've got practically any money for any purpose. So what that means is that as an investor, they could either compete with me for one round and maybe I win or they win, or I could call them up and say, hey, I've got a great deal for you, you should do the next round, or the other way around. So therefore, you might compete with somebody, but that's fine, right? Because in the next company, you might actually collaborate. And that's supernatural. And it's people. So therefore, none of this is personal. It's literally just business. And you try to, if a founder wins a great investor and therefore I can't invest, which very rarely happens given our initial check size is 125,000 euros. That is super unusual. But if I was writing much larger checks, then it's good for the founder. If I'm not pro-founder, then I have a problem, right? Because then the founders talk to each other, and I get adverse selection from founders. That should better not happen.
And going back to the ecosystem and specifically Berlin, you mentioned in the past when you were part of Techstars that Berlin was going to be the European startup city.
Yeah.
How much of that has materialized in your view? Now, you started Techstars 10 years ago, right? When you were there.
Yeah.
And so now we are in 2026. Has that materialized the way you expected or not?
Yeah, it has definitely materialized, for sure. Because Berlin, so you have London, Paris, Berlin, these three cities have become very large in terms of venture capital invested per year. So absolutely, I think that is, from where it was 10 years ago to like from 15 to 25, if you look at the trajectory, or even from 15 to 20, it's, if we disregard the Corona years, it's been quite a remarkable growth. And it will probably continue to grow. I think in Germany as a whole, obviously, Europe as a whole has got a whole bunch of problems. UK has got enormous problems. France does too. We do too. There's a lot that needs to be done, but that really has nothing to do with the founders or the VCs or anything. This is a macro problem. So I would say we have a macro problem here that we need to address. Maybe things like EU Inc., where there was been announcements over the last few months that there was a new one, and most recent one was yesterday, where that's most likely happening, and so on and so forth.
Can you briefly describe what that is?
So EU Inc. is an initiative that was established by a few investors and founders a couple of years ago, and the idea is to set up a new company type at the European level, a European incorporated. So the European Commission calls it the 28th regime, because there are 27 member states, and this is then the 28th separate incorporated, separate registry outside of the member states for all European startups. And then this company form can be, so if I form an EU Inc. and I'm in Germany, then this becomes a German EU Inc., meaning I still have to comply with all the labor laws and taxation and things like that. But the share registry, the company, and so forth is all European. And when the guy who initiated this is called Andreas Klinger, he runs a VC called Prototype Capital, or he's rebranded it now into Prototype Capital. And there are other people involved, like Philipp Herkelmann, Simon Schäfer, and a whole number of other people who have worked very hard on making this happen. So there have been increasing announcements from the EU that this is happening, and von der Leyen yesterday or the day before said that she even called it EU Inc. now and not the 28th regime anymore. So we hope that this happens. Yeah, and this plus there are a couple of follow-up initiatives that are planned there. But that could really, for startups and investors in Europe, that could really be a super positive change.
Catalyst for attracting. So what do you think is missing? I always think about Europe and US.
Yeah.
Big, differentiating, like two different regions. Arguably, I mean, of course, US, San Francisco has produced some of the world's biggest tech startups. When you look at Europe, European Union and UK as a block of Europe, let's say, what do you think are the biggest differences that make Europe being, to some degree, less successful in terms of producing a high number of successful companies?
Yeah, there are a number of these things. So, well, it would take me about 3 minutes to explain it all, but it's basically, it starts with the large capital allocators, the pension funds, the insurance companies, the banks, and so forth. The endowments, the family offices. So in Europe, I think there's about 0.2% of their assets allocated into venture, and in the US it's about 2%. So it's about 10 times difference. Yeah. The reason why it doesn't happen in Europe is because we've got regulation like Solvency II, Basel III, and other things that, plus the regulators and the way in which they work, mean that it all makes it very expensive for the large capital allocators to allocate into venture. And the cost of investing is artificially increased by regulation, quite significantly so. To the extent the cost is increased so much that the allocation into the future of our economy and the future of our technology is artificially heavily reduced. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that on the venture side, on the venture firm side, we have got all sorts of regulation in Europe and admin and bureaucracy. In Germany, for example, the fund of funds and the venture funds are artificially hampered to invest into companies that are not incorporated in Germany because the Finanzamt creates significant. So as soon as you do that and you invest in a Delaware C Corp and you take a board seat, the Finanzamt will, through how they then tax your fund, effectively end up destroying your fund and make your future fund, your firm or future funds that you put together uninvestable by investors. So there is significant bureaucracy there that hampers the ability for German investors, for example, to grow large venture funds. Mm-hmm. On the company level, you've got the problem that you've got 27 different company types. If you want to invest in a Spanish company, if you sign the documents, you yourself need a Spanish tax ID. The company that invests, or the fund, needs a Spanish tax ID. It takes months to get one. You need to pay quite a lot of money for it. There's withholding tax in Italy. I think in Lithuania they have no preference shares, although they might have changed that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't effectively invest in a Portuguese company. It takes like 6 months. It's completely impossible. You would be beyond foolish to invest into a Polish company. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Germany and then Austria, we've got the notaries. So all of those problems, like by themselves, when you compound that by 27, means it's just not possible. So this is why we need an EU Inc. Yeah. In Germany, you can't really have stock options. Founder vesting is impossible, right? You just can't kick people out. It's literally not doable. Mm-hmm. So on the company level, you have all sorts of problems. And then we don't have a stock exchange to take companies public.
Yeah. So connecting your previous point about EU Inc. is affecting this level of the...
One of these four areas gets affected by EU Inc. and it solves company level problems, right? Because it gives us one entity type to invest into with one registry, with one type of stock options, and with all the share governance, of that entity. Mm-hmm. That sits all at European level and it's all the same. And it's effectively, and that's wonderful for investors because you can have one standard set of documentation, like a safe or something like that. That's an EU Inc. Oh, it's the standard EU Inc. safe. Money in.
Yeah. So, for example, it would make it possible for you to invest in a Portuguese company and less crazy to invest in a Polish company.
I've invested in several Polish companies, and none of them were a Polish company. They're all Delaware C Corps or UK Limiteds. And the same is true in Portugal, and the same is true in all of the smaller countries. Yeah. So I think we've invested in Hungarian companies and companies from pretty much any country, and pretty much none of them, they were all American entities.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so that's sort of, and it's complete, the tax problems that arise because of that, and the overhead is significant. Yeah. And it just gets ignored by founders because otherwise you can't get things done. But
it's a problem for the investors, yeah?
Yeah, no, for us, but for the founders, it's a problem. Yeah, so therefore it's a problem for the investors. So this is why having an EU Inc. is actually a fantastic development. So I think this solves one of the 4 problems that we have from a German perspective, and the other 3 are yet to be tackled. Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned the other 3, so for clarification, so one is the big fund allocators, so the money that flows in, then the fund, let's call them distributors, or the funds.
Yeah, the VCs who channel the money to the startups. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the third one is the legal framework and incorporation. What was the 4th one?
Stock exchange. We need a European stock exchange.
For liquidity events, exit after. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that you didn't mention, maybe is not a problem in your view, is the different in mindset. This is something that I've heard so many times over and over from investors that invest across the pond, especially US or Europe, that they say that generally speaking, again, generalization, European founders have a very different mindset and aggressiveness toward growth compared to their colleagues in US. Is that true for you? Do you find that true?
No.
Yeah.
That's a complete myth.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe it's manifesting this way because, again, if you're a US founder, you have 350 million people to potentially serve, 340. And in Europe, again, you have so many blockers that you can't think about Europe as one country where you are selling. Is that the reason?
There is no fundamental mindset difference between Europeans or Americans. As a fact, many of the people who found companies in America are Europeans. The mindset of the founders is the same pretty much everywhere. I don't think that is a problem. And even the mindset of the VCs these days is extremely similar. I don't think there is a qualitative difference there. The mindset difference comes when you're doing enterprise sales. On the customer side, the mindset difference and the regulatory environment is completely different. And it is much, much easier to do business with enterprise customers in the US. To an extent that when you look at the metrics of certain companies and you say these are American customers, these are European customers, the European metrics look crap and the ones in the US look wonderful. And we've seen this in a couple of companies. And then the only answer is, well, you should probably focus on the US and maybe you want to move there, right? So that can be true for certain types of companies which are enterprise oriented. Where you basically go to where the customer reception is strongest, right? If you're a game studio, that's irrelevant because you make a game, you distribute it anywhere in the world, the customer, it's a completely different thing. You know? Or if you're a biotech startup, you know? You obviously make your technology and then you have pharma companies in the US and in Europe and so forth, and they're all extremely similar in many, many regards. So that doesn't matter, but you always need to distinguish that. So I think there are differences between the US and Europe, but I think I find them I see them much, much more. The qualitative differences are on the customer side, far, far more than there are anywhere else, really.
Qualitative, but also quantitative, right? So depending on the market you're in, right? So if you're in US, assuming your product can be sold across the entire US, you have 340 million people.
Yeah.
But if you're selling a product that is in German, language is a barrier, but very solvable now. But you still have access to the direct market.
But the fragmented market is always a challenge. Yeah, for sure.
On the enterprise sales example that you gave, just so I get it right. So you're saying, let's say I have a B2B product it is easier to sell it to a S&P 500 company in the US versus to a DAX company in Germany?
Yes.
Again, is regulation the big blocker?
Yeah, I'm wondering, why is that?
It's partially that, but it's partially so. For example, in Germany, you have regulation. When a company wants to purchase software, they need to ask the Betriebsrat for permission. They can't just buy it.
Making me nervous.
Right? Though it's the truth, right? So that introduces endless, depending on the customer. All right. Then you've got other frameworks like DORA, GDPR, or DSGVO in Germany, and all of that crap that comes on top. None of which really, I don't think it makes anything better, really. I mean, it's really questionable what it really makes better. Yeah. Let me put it like that. I'm really, you say, oh, it's very important. It's like, do you actually know how this works? I'm like, oh, do you know what happens to the data when it gets all accumulated? And are you sure that you're now more protected than before? And then I think the difference between, so anyway, there's lots of regulation. I think the perception that many consumers have about that the regulation is good for them is actually doing the opposite. And we could have like a 3-hour debate about regulation and what each individual bit is supposed to do and what it actually does. And then how probably you're much less secure than you were before, but that's a totally different story. But you've got a bunch of regulation there that makes a difference. But beyond that, in the US, they just buy software much faster and they spend more. Yeah, and the conversion rate is also higher. So the math is completely different. Yeah, so that's definitely true.
I don't want to force this concept into it now, but I think, do you think it comes down to mentality? Like, again, parking out regulation. The reason why they're spending more, they're less risk averse in buying a piece of software. Is it mentality? That is, for them, they would approve it and try it out more than a German CFO or a UK counterparty?
Yeah, no, there's a chicken and egg problem in all of this, right? So if you have a lot of, if you have laws, so for example, the German law around software has been there since 1972. So it's been there for 50 years plus, yeah? So longer than I've been alive. And so therefore it's very hard to say what came first, the aversion or the law. Yeah, it is there, and there is a certain type of mindset. If you took all of those laws away, would the mindset change? Yes, definitely. Because you would just be able to act differently. And then when you do, and you get positive reinforcement, it changes the mindset. Yeah. If you introduce a whole bunch of new laws, like they've also done in the United States, and there's some state-by-state differences, and there's obviously a power struggle currently going on between people who want to regulate everything and people who don't, and whatever. The more they regulate in the US, the worse it's going to get from a mindset perspective. I think we talked about systems before, right? So this is systemic, this is system change. You change the system, and therefore the people within the system will adapt to the system, and the system will adapt to them. So right now, there's a lot of regulation that comes from the European Commission or from the EU in general. Some, like EU Inc., I think is good. A whole number of other things that they're doing, I think, is really terrible, yeah, and really damaging. And I don't see the benefit, to be frankly honest, for any number of those laws. I don't understand how they do anything apart from slow everything down and make everything worse. I don't see the additional benefit at all. Yeah. So that the more negative things happen and pile on top of each other, the more everything then, as a result of the regulation, you as a manager will behave ever more cautiously because the risk that you're going to get sued goes up. So then right. What are you just more cautious, or is the environment making you more cautious? And the answer is nobody knows, because you don't even, we said this before, you can't play the game again.
Yeah.
So therefore we don't have version 2 to compare with, right? But given the number of founders that I see that we back, and then these are the same people. So there's an experiment. You take the same founder and you put that person into the US, yeah, and it just works. There is no, I don't think it's like magic. These are green people and blue people or something like that. You know what I mean? They're all just people. And they can perform in any which geography, I don't think that matters. But if you put them in a dysfunctional environment, then the people cannot perform. I think that is the problem.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a good example.
Yeah.
And from personal experience, one thing about regulations that I've found to be very frustrating oftentimes as a manager who needs to make decisions is when regulation doesn't make any sense from a business perspective. Like there is literally no thought process behind asking you as a company to do something. And that kind of gets you more and more frustrated into thinking, what am I even doing here? Who am I even dealing with? Why do I not just pack my bags and go somewhere else? Like let it be the US or elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, what can I say? I mean,
it is what it is.
Mindlessness is always a bad thing to a certain extent, right? So it should be mindful is the opposite. Mindful is better than mindlessness. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now there is a lot of that, and I think if you talk to the people who make these laws, they all think that they're doing the right thing, and they actually frequently don't understand how what the implementation means and what it really does. Yeah. So, yeah, that's basically how it works.
A bit of a teasing question. Let's say you found a great company. You think the founders are absolutely upstanding. It's a great business. And they just got term sheets from 2 US multi-stage funds.
Yeah.
And they can only take two VCs. So they can take both of them or one of them, and you want to put the money in. How do you convince them to accept your money?
Well, I say, look, they'll both write 5 million, I'll do 125. I'll help you. I'll be your consigliere and tell you how to deal with both of them, how to keep both of them happy. Tell the Americans I'm local so I can help with some of the local shit,
So this founder first attitude that you described at Techstars, that's also a large part of your value proposition today.
Yeah, the ethos obviously carries across. Yeah. So look, our value proposition is we've all invested in a lot of companies. We've seen the movie before so many times, and we are just as expensive or as cheap as any of the other money. Yeah. So you get a lot of bang for very little buck. Yeah. So the value that you get for the space that we occupy on your cap table is proportionally gigantic. We're not saying we're magic or we're doing amazing things. We're just saying for that much space, we're pretty incredible.
Yeah. Amazing.
For the counseling and
yeah, because I talk to the founders every 2 weeks for 30 minutes in a video call as a minimum for 12 to 18 months. And then hopefully by that time they're somewhere in a good place and they've got good investors and so forth. And then I can stop doing that. In some cases I do this for years.
You counseled so many founders and they turn to you for help. Who is your gents for you? Like when you need help, who do you turn to?
I've got several people, different people.
Are they do you have a structured relationship, for example, people who are LPs in the fund or their friends, mentors that you accumulated? As you said, special people you accumulated over the years.
Yeah, it's the latter. Yeah. I mean, there also can be LPs in the fund, but that's more of it's different. So I have, I've got people I talk to regularly, 3 of them, and I get various different aspects from them. And then more recently now, we are in a new stage of the company, so I've started to add more. I mean, I call them advisors, but they're basically mentors to me more than anything else. That's sort of, and they've all helped build companies from 0 to over $1 billion in assets that they manage. And I need people around me who've been on that journey and who basically, so I've recently started to establish more of an advisory board of those kind of people, because as a company, we're getting to the point where that becomes that becomes increasingly, I wouldn't say necessary, but it's more, we're getting to the point where there are quite a few questions to which I don't have answers, which hasn't been the case for years, because all of these angel things and whatnot, that is all, I've done this so many times, I don't have any questions anymore. But there are now new questions that come up that are a function of the growth of the company that I have never had to answer before, and as a consequence, I I'm surrounding myself increasingly with other people who've been there and done that, as an example.
Yes,
that's
sense.
usually a good situation to be in.
Yeah,
it's driven by growth.
Yeah, it's good. It's also that
regulation.
The more no. I mean, the regulation is the regulation, right? So I try to impact regulation and talk to all sorts of people about that, but I don't. You know, we know all the regulation that impacts us. We understand that. We know how to deal with that, and it's and it actually has gotten, in our case, it has gotten better over the years. Yeah. So it's on the venture side, we're actually regulatory-wise in a better position than we were 5 years ago, I think, for example. Yeah, not much, but a little bit. So that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, clear. And on the personal side, you also have a family. How do you make sure you take care of them? You mentioned the first time we met that you're in a very transactional business, which means you need to take care of the transaction as it happens. And that can happen anytime, even when you are on holidays with your family. How do you make sure you have time for your wife, the rest of your family?
Well, I'm there almost all the time. So we have breakfast together, we have dinner together. I mean, not every day, but breakfast we have almost every day. I've structured my life in such a way that I have time for my family. Before I even started Angel Investor, I said I want to run a business. I don't want to do a job where I live on a plane. It was super important. So I deliberately did not do quite a few things that would have been possible. I was asked several times, hey, why don't you become a partner in this firm or whatever, most of which were in London. I even got some concrete offers, but I just said, guys, I'm just not gonna, I don't want to do that. I don't want to live that life. And so therefore I never developed the interest in that area, and I never really leaned into it. And as a consequence, it never happened, because I basically said family first, and I disregarded or discounted all opportunities to zero that would have required me living on the plane, like working for a Series A fund. I never did that categorically. Yeah. I said it's not for me.
Yeah. It's good to have that clarity and be able to make decisions for that.
Yeah, I just put it on the list, and then I followed the list. I had 6 criteria of what I wanted to do, and I said, these are things this basically a couple of knockout criteria. So everything that doesn't comply with those criteria, just like it's a no. It's like living on a plane, no. Yeah. Must be investing in founders. Yeah.
What are the other 5? So one is living on a plane, to be there with her.
Yeah, I would have to, it's somewhere in my phone, but I'm not going to pull it out now and read it out. But I said, I want to found a company with people whom I know, like an investment company. I want to invest in founders. And I want to found a company or be in a company where I have control over the company and control over my destiny. I want to, and I think I said I didn't want to live on the plane. Yeah, and I can't remember exactly what the other criteria were, but there were like 5 or 6 of them or something like that. But that's sort of like how I thought about it. And then there was a list of 15 to 20 opportunities or something like that. And then I looked at all of them, and I always wrote down what was good about it and what was bad about it. And then I made a decision, and almost everything went to no. Yeah. Oh yeah, and I said I want to invest in Europe and not somewhere else in the world, because I said I don't want to do something where I have like invest in Africa or something like that, because it would have meant flying a lot over there. But it's also a whole bunch of things that I really don't understand. So I didn't want to do something that was outside of my natural sphere of knowledge or geography or anything extreme like that. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. So the set of criteria obviously inform your decisions and the filtering mechanism through which you said, I'm going to do this, invest in Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's just a question how. Yeah. And how that's going to happen. So that's basically, but then it quite naturally fell into place when Oliver and I had this discussion, because it was so simple, because I just, in my mind, it just went through those criteria within 10 seconds, and I knew this was going to work. So I just said, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Because again, it's just like if you have made a decision in your mind of broadly of what you want to do, and then the opportunity presents itself, you can actually grasp it super quickly and decisively, because you've already made up your mind conceptually, but specifically you don't know what it is yet.
Yes. What motivates you in all of this? Like if you look back at your first 50 years of life and everything you've done. What is the driver?
Yeah, it's hard to say, actually. Very difficult to say. I mean, look, you want to be. So the first step, there is always an element of money. If you take money out, very few people do anything. Hey, come and work for my startup for free. No. It doesn't work, right? So it's like, I've got a great mission. It's like, what? No equity, no salary. Yeah, just for the thing. No. So there's a fundamental untruth, and that people come for the mission, and that if you take the money out, nothing happens. And because even in places where there is, people need money from somewhere somehow. So there is always a money element, number one. Number two, there is an element of recognition, right? You want to be recognized for doing great work. Yeah? If you work somewhere and I tell you every day, Giuseppe, you're shit, and I hate your guts, you're going to leave, right? Because you want to have recognition. Internally, externally, and everybody says, you're doing this, and this is sucky. Yeah, you're not going to do it for 20 years, right? You need to get some positive confirmation from somebody that you're awesome, right? It's super important, this. And then I think the third element is there needs to be a sense of intrinsic satisfaction, where you just look at that and you said, I did a great thing there. That was really good. I'm super happy with myself of how I did this. Yeah. So let's just say when I did we talked before about restoring antique furniture. Yeah. You get a pile of crap. It's like completely, this looks horrible, this broken and all sorts of, like it's a wardrobe, right? So you have a broken wardrobe that 3 legs are missing and the door is not attached and a bit's missing and there's rotten wood and there's like, and then you fix it all up and you finish it and it's beautiful. Yeah, it's incredibly satisfying because you look at it and you think, yeah, I did that. That was me. I finished that. I did the thing. Yeah, look how I did this here. This was difficult, but look how I fixed this leg. It was completely broken out, but I took this and then I put the metal like that and then, beautiful. Yeah, great job. And it's incredibly satisfying. Yeah, so it's through, and then somebody comes and says, oh, that looks great. And then they give you the money.
Perfect.
And then you've got the trifecta of the intrinsic satisfaction. You did a great job and you're happy with yourself, plus recognition, plus money. Right? And that is basically, I think, like probably the 3 most important elements that you can derive from anything that you do. And so then the question is, so what does that mean for you and what comes first and what's more important? Then I think you will always have all 3 in combination. Because let's just say you're an artist and you make incredible work, but nobody recognizes it and nobody ever gives you any money, you'll be super unhappy with your life. Even if like 100 years later, everyone says, oh my God, it's a masterpiece, $100 million, And then the guy was like, cut his ear off and died in, you know what I mean? It's like, you need to have all 3 to be happy. And the order, I don't think there is an order. You just need to, it's a question of, it's not even yin and yang because there's like a third element. So there are these 3 elements, you need to find a motion where you can bring those 3 elements in balance. And I think the more you understand about yourself and what makes you intrinsically happy, what satisfies you, yeah, then you find a way to, if you do that well, people will recognize that you've done it well. If you can connect that meaningfully with enough money so that you're happy about the money aspect as well, I think that is probably the order of things. It's very rare if you start from a money angle that you find something that then, sometimes it's just a game of making money and that's the game and you just become good at it and you get a recognition for it and you make money and that's, you just, basically it doesn't matter what you do intrinsically, it's just the money is the game. Yeah, I think there are people like that as well. But for most people who start just with the money, they're dissatisfied because they, when you hear that they're dissatisfied, it's because they can't they can't go from there to the place where they become intrinsically happy with their own work output, with the accomplishments of what they have produced. And I think that is then when it becomes extremely hollow, because then you probably, I can imagine that these people feel very hollow inside. Yeah. And equally, people become very jaded when they produce what they think is great work. Yeah, the recognition is like, nah, who knows? And then they don't really make any money. Yeah, and then these people are frequently very jealous of other people who find that balance. Yeah, because they think it's maybe easier to attribute their own situation to an external factor than actually say, no, it's actually what I do or how I do it, or maybe it's me. Yeah, and that's actually the problem. As opposed to saying, there's some evil people and it's all their fault, right? And therefore something needs to be done about these people over there, which is most likely in most situations probably not true.
Such an interesting way to put it. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And if you were carrying a flag that follows you wherever you go, and it's the first thing that people see whenever you enter a room, what does the flag say, or what symbol is on the flag?
The way I think about life is that you want to be future-oriented and optimistic, and you want to base your beliefs on the fact that you can realize your own happiness through your own work, so that you are self-deterministic. I'm trying to build a better future, and I'm going optimistically into that future, and I'm going to build it. Yeah? I'm going to optimistically build a better future for me and my children and my grandchildren and for everybody else who wants to come along and be part of that journey. Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what it would be on the flag, what symbol would be on the flag. I'm not sure I want to have a flag stuck to my back. I'll quite happily go somewhere and not be recognized, right? But I think it's all about building the future so that everybody and being optimistic about the future, being oriented towards the future, and being self-deterministic about the future. I can build the future myself, and do that in a way where everybody benefits. Yeah? So I think this is sort of that's how I think about that. But if it's a word, the word should be the future. Basically build a great future that's really worth living in, and really it's where people can fulfill their own dreams, right? They can self-fulfill. I think that's the most important thing for me, is to build the future.
Thank you for sharing, for thinking about it.
Yes.
Thanks for being here. It's great fun. Great discussion.
Thank you so much. And what question should we ask the next guest without knowing who they are?
Yeah, I love those questions. It's great. It's a mixture of business and philosophy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. Because what's your life philosophy? How do you think about whatever? Because look, I mean, life is all about being in balance, bringing into balance various disparate factors, and being happy with how you've brought about the balance. Because if all the time I have spent with my kids would be terrible for my kids, would be terrible for me. If I spend absolutely no time with my kids, that would be terrible for my kids and terrible for me too. So therefore I need to bring it into a meaningful balance somehow. Yeah, so it's it's either you have a situation where you want to be at one end of the extreme somewhere, and everybody in the middle gets squeezed. So it's either a distribution like that, it's a U-shaped distribution, so the extremes win, or you have an N-shaped distribution where when you bring things into balance, you win. Mm-hmm. So it's neither pure capitalism nor communism. It is, soziale Marktwirtschaft. Yeah, it's capitalism plus the social capitalism, basically. Mm-hmm. It's a higher performance than both ends of the extremes as a society as a whole. It's proven, it's a fact, it's not debatable actually. So therefore, certain types of, and I think life is a question of, you want to bring various different things into balance and not live at an extreme in the way that, although if you become an extreme entrepreneur, they might be extremely successful, but it might imply that other things are not. So then there are probably still other elements that you as a founder have to bring into balance for all of this to be worthwhile. And you can see certain types of founders who exemplify this, like Daniel Ek. When you listen to him on a podcast, you can tell he's a guy who's in balance. And you can tell that his company is worth, I don't know how much, is it 50 billion, 100 billion.
Is that Spotify?
Yeah, Spotify, yeah. So basically, so Daniel Ek is definitely a guy like that. And he has built an extremely successful company, and at the same time, his life is now in balance. Although I'm sure in year 4, it was like completely different. Back in 2011 or whatever, right? So year 4. I think he started in 2006 or 5.
7, yeah.
5, 6, 7. Yeah, no, I think 7, I don't know.
I think 7, and then 2010 they went to US. They moved the headquarters to New York.
I just know we did an event at Library House in 2007 in April. We were in the IMAX, and we filled the room with cool founders who pitched, and there was like hundreds of people watching, and he was one of the founders. So that was either one of the first things that he did, but it must have already been something, because he was standing up and he was presenting, so it can't have been 0. I don't think it was at 0, but so maybe 2006, 7, something like that. Yeah, for sure. But definitely in April 7, he must have been there, because he was on stage pitching the thing, so he must have. Darren picked him, so he must have been somebody already, yeah.
It's hard to believe it's been 20 years.
Almost, yeah. So anyways, what question should you ask? There is only one podcast where they ask one same question at the end. And it's in the Invest Like the Best podcast, where he asks always, what's the kindest thing anybody has ever done for you?
And
it's a great question.
I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
I love it.
And the answers are remarkably consistent, because it's either a family member who's been incredibly kind, or a teacher, or somebody who basically in a job where they gave somebody a shot, although they arguably didn't really. It's questionable to what extent they really deserved it. But they gave them a leg up. Yeah. So for me, it was probably the guys at Leeds University who invented advanced standing entry into the 3rd year of a degree program, although arguably there was absolutely no reason for them to do that. Yeah, because they didn't make any money out of it. They had, apart from, I think they just had some fun doing it. So maybe they got some fun out of it. Yeah. And I worked in the lab of one of the guys, and then
they liked you maybe.
Oh, that was great in the lab. Yeah. I was known as the man with the golden hands. Every experiment that I did worked, and I helped a PhD student do a PhD, and she was super happy, and he was happy, and everybody was like, it worked out for everybody. But they didn't have to do it, They really didn't. So
out of kindness.
Yeah, they just did it because, I don't know why, I never asked them, right? So, but I think they just thought, there's a weird guy with a fax machine. Yeah, and why not? They're like, why shouldn't we do that?
Yeah. I absolutely love the question.
Yeah.
We'll pass it on to the next guest.
Yeah. So basically, you can maybe rephrase it slightly, but it's really, what's the thing that somebody did for you that had a massive impact in your life, that they really didn't have to do?
Out of kindness.
Yeah, just literally like that.
Yeah.
So you can rephrase it. It's like, because if you talk about transitions, like who has helped you who has had an enormous impact on one transition point, although they really didn't have to do it, because they did it out of, like, who helped you to make this, or you can rephrase this, right?
It's such a beautiful question, because it tells a lot also about the person you're asking, about how they see their path and the contribution of people to their path.
I've written this down, by the way. Every single major decision in my life, every single big thing. At one point I wrote down what are all the major transition points in my life, and why did I make them, and who helped me. I literally have it somewhere in my notes. There's like an entire thing written down.
Such a beautiful thing. Does it give you gratitude? What is the emotion that comes when you reread it?
The funny thing is that what you realize is that people obviously do things because they always believe that there is something in it for them, at least to a certain extent. Yeah? Even if it's just a feeling that they've helped somebody. But the things that you end up being the most grateful for are the things that have really had a big impact, where the person who gave the impact didn't have to do that. And the more that happens to you, and the more that you become conscious of it, the more you start to act like that yourself, I think. Yeah. Because you just realize, oh, these people have, and then the older you become, the more it has happened to you. So the more you suddenly realize, gosh, I should do this to some kids.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's those acts of kindness that then end up, that becomes part of their life story. It becomes super important to them.
I read this sentence the other day, which was something like, your true character shows in how you treat people that can do absolutely nothing for you in return.
Yeah, there is that element as well. Although I think that's different, but that's a different aspect. Well, it's probably all rooted in a similar vein, if you like. Actually, the most what can be extremely disappointing is that when you do something for somebody, although you really don't have to, and then they misuse or they you're disappointed by the outcome, yeah, because they don't deliver to your expectation. So as an example, let's just go back to the university example one last time, right? Let's just say they do all this effort, and then I get in, and then what I do is I party all year, and I drink lots of beer and I do nothing, yeah? And at the end I get a terrible mark or I fail, and then I leave. That would be I would have abused their kindness. And that's extremely disappointing. So that would have been extremely disappointing for them, and obviously for me as well. But it's, you know what I mean. It's like, and sometimes I engage in an act of kindness, and then this person doesn't understand, or it just, I don't know. I don't want to say they abuse it, but I feel abused. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they act in a way that is so there's an implicit social contract that says I've done an act of kindness. And this, I didn't have to do this, but I did it nonetheless. So I now expect of you to deliver your end of the social contract. And then when people don't do that, that's extremely disappointing. And it's sort of like that then, but then to be frankly honest.
Yeah. What can you do?
It's like whatever, next. And then you just give first again to other people. And then the more you give first, you realize that eventually it comes back. It's incredibly gratifying when it works. And then when it comes back in so many unexpected ways, you've got no clue how or why it comes back.
And then it's also okay when it doesn't come back and there's nothing. And then it
always comes back. It's really remarkable how, and it comes back in ways where so for example, when I was on this 20 Angel podcast, so they do reference calls of every guest, right? I had on my NPS score was 10. Mm-hmm. Right, you can't get higher than 10. Everybody gave me 10. They called like 5 people, everybody gave me 10. So it's like, if they called 5 other people, I don't know, it wouldn't have been a 10, yeah? But when they called 5, it was like a 10. It was the highest NPS I'd ever had on the show. He said that, right?
Incredible.
It was, I don't know whether it was a 10, but it's like the highest I've ever had, which must have been a 10. Now, as a managing director, I never got a 10. I was always some fucker who gave me less than a 9, you know? It's like, oh yeah, you didn't spend enough time with me. You were the CTO. What do you want from me? I'm not going to tell you how to write the code. It's like, shit, I should have bought my beer for the CTOs, you know? It's like, I was always like a 9 point something. You know, it's super frustrating when there's one guy who gives you a bad score. Anyway, but the thing is, so then he comes back like that, yeah. And then I think they even said that in the podcast. I can't remember or something, or whether he said that before or during. But it's sort of interesting because what does that do? It means that I'm highly regarded by those people. I have no idea what that's exactly good for, but it's good in a number of ways. Yeah? And so therefore, what it just shows is that if you try to help people, eventually that will fall back on you. If you abuse people, that will fall back on you. Yeah? And so it doesn't actually matter what it is or how it comes, but it will definitely come at some point. If you are good to a lot of people over the years, eventually they'll all show up. You really need them. Yeah, it will happen.
I think those are beautiful closing remarks. Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for
Appreciate
trusting
your
us
time.
and for doing this really fun and a lot of learnings too.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was good fun.